You mentioned food and materiality. What is?
Well, it has to do with the processes of production, distribution, and consumption in the presence of the neighbor.
What does that have to do with Christian people?
Well, it has to do with the care for the earth. So all of the environmental, ecological concerns, and what we know from Wendell Berry and many other people is that a family farm in the long run is more productive and more sustainable than agribusiness. So that's on the production end of it. That contradicts the mandate of capitalism that some time ago the Secretary of Agriculture said, get big or get out. And the alternative is to, I suppose, get serious about the reality of the earth and its productive capacity. So that's kind of what I would say about production.
You talk about the invitation from consumers to citizens and creatures of God. What do you mean by citizen?
Well, citizens are people who are active participants in the public process. And when the church focuses upon spirituality, public questions never seem to be on the horizon in any important or sustained way. So the tradition of Calvin, in which I stand, Calvin was the great public theologian of all of the reformers, and he really intended that the practice of citizenship should be a practice of serious discipleship. And I think either that in the United States Christians have defaulted and not been participants, or they have participated but they have forgotten their baptism, and so we act according to other ideologies rather than the claims of our faith. So the recovery of a sense of citizenship, which would bring with it a sense that paying taxes is a Christian enterprise, and that we have to think about who gets taxed and what that tax money goes for, and all of that.
I mean, you think Calvin would think, that part of the church's role in discipleship would be shaping and stirring the imagination around scarcity and abundance?
I think that's exactly right. Yep. And because if an institution like the church, and one might think of other allies, if the church doesn't raise those questions, who's going to raise those questions? And what happens is that the ideology of scarcity simply wins by default, so that capitalism has evolved. Whatever it was intended, it's evolved to saying there's not enough to go around, and I have to be sure I get my share, and if I can, I'd like to get some of your share. That's all on the assumption of scarcity, and the claim of the gospel, of course, is that the God of abundance has provided and continues to provide more than enough for all of us, were it rightly and faithfully distributed.
But
We're locked in to policies and procedures and practices that intend that not to happen. And I think the most obvious illustration of that is the new regressive tax policy that has been recently enacted, which was to reduce taxation on wealthy people in order that they may accumulate at a more rapid rate. And that means that the government goes underfunded, and that means that the government can't have the kinds of programs that are needed to sustain the left behind. And obviously that was very intentional. The intention is to reduce the revenue that the government has available, and then to say, well, we can't fund these programs, we don't have any money.
Oh, it was to lubricate the trickle-downness.
Oh, that's true. I forgot that. Yes.
And left behind, you're not talking about people that were not, it's not a rapture thing?
No, it's not a rapture thing. It is being excommunicated from viability in the economy. Peter Block talks about that as people who are economically isolated. And if you're isolated, you do not benefit from, contribute to, or have access to the goods of the community.
And you think part of the role of the church is to seek out that isolated?
The role of the church is to imagine and advocate for policies that will help connect the economically isolated to the ongoing reality of the public economy.
What a liberal.
The word that you use for it is what a neighbor. It is not about being liberal or progressive or socialist. It's about being neighborly. And the church does itself a great disservice when it prances about under labels of liberal or progressive or any of that. It's not about any of that. Those are not biblical categories. The category is neighborliness. And that's our mantra. This is our story. This is our song. Praising the Savior
all the day long. This is a story. Sorry. Sorry. Spirit. Can you have the Spirit?
Of course.
Okay.
Yep.
What is the role of the Spirit? What is this?
The role.
I thought you weren't into spirituality.
I'm not into an over appreciation of spirituality. Well, what we say is the Spirit heals, renews, empowers, and transforms, makes new. And what that means, if you think that we live in a technological world of predictable causes and outcomes, the Spirit is the strange disruptor of our capacity to control. And what we know is that all of our best learning cannot domesticate God's Spirit, that God's Spirit will work where it will.
I think you say that like what's blocking us from receiving those new imaginations outside of our own net will?
Well, because I think the dominant ideology is to get control. And the Spirit cannot be controlled. The Spirit, it's like the wind. It blows where it will, and it endlessly opens closed doors and surprises us. And the church has often thought that it could determine where the Spirit would be permitted to be, but the Spirit doesn't wait for the permission of the church.
I thought that was just a mature thing, is to try and predict the future and project and those kind of things.
I suppose it may be, but it doesn't work. It works a lot of the time, but it doesn't work all the time. I just heard this example. There's a graduate of Columbia Seminary where I taught. He's a pastor in a little bitty town in South Carolina, and it came about that an immigrant community built a mosque in town in South Carolina. And this pastor had the compelling idea that church people ought to relate to mosque people. So it came to a vote to get rid of the pastor. They couldn't tolerate that. They lost that vote. And now in this little community, these folks are living together with respect and engagement. It is the work of the Spirit. Who in the world knew that that would happen? Now it happened because this pastor and some other wise people had a sense about how to bring this about. But they were led by the Spirit. They were led by the Spirit to enact newness that I imagine they thought wasn't possible.
That sounds good newsy.
It is very good, or it is evangelical, to coin a word.
That could work. Yeah, I mean, it seems like if fish were made to live in water, like if creatures were created to live in the neighborhood, what do you imagine that like? What's the gifts and the fruit and what happens in the neighborhood?
Well,
I mean, is it just policy and getting something right? Like
given
what happens in abundance if the abundance is grown in the neighborhood?
Everybody flourishes. Everybody flourishes.
What does that
now,
mean?
some are flourishing with more abundance than others. I'm not blind to social inequalities that are intransigent. But it can be that everybody gets looked after. And rural communities tend to do that. Rural communities tend to take care of poor people because everybody knows everybody. The problem is when you get to mass culture or urban society, then you need policies. You need policies that will make the sharing of goods and care and mercy and compassion and justice and righteousness, that whole catalog. You need policies that help people live in, with, and toward the neighbor.
As long as somebody doesn't work less than me and get the same amount of money,
Exactly.
then I'll be all right with it.